Hello, boys and girls. Thanks for tuning in, and as always, welcome to the Joy of Piping. This morning, of course, we have our Danish pipe shop mug with some black coffee. It's Dunkin' Donuts, if you're interested to know what blend. And we are smoking again the Jake Hackert Reverse Calabash with the 2019 Sutliff Kringle Flake. I was so impressed by this pipe last time that I wanted to test and see if it was in fact the pipe or the tobacco, and to be honest with you, I think it is a combination of the two, but this pipe is an exquisite smoker. I'm almost tempted to get rid of all my other pipes and switch to strictly reverse calabash style, because this is it's incredible how much more enjoyable a tobacco is when smoked through a pipe like this. That, and Jake does a really great job with capturing bird's eye when he sees it, near the stem and at the top of the bowl here. It is a perfect weekend for our pipe meditation. It has been warm the last couple of days here in North Carolina, which is a good thing. After nearly, I think Raleigh's got 5 or 6 inches of rain total over the course of 3 days, and it was getting to the point where I was starting to wonder if I was going to need to build myself an ark. And that usually contributes to high humidity here, because the ground will be so saturated, which is uncommon, because sometimes we'll go weeks without rain, but the ground will be so saturated the sun will start baking the moisture out of the ground, and then the humidity overall will just shoot through the roof, and it's suddenly so uncomfortable. And this is the shift that I talked about in one of my last couple of videos that I was expecting. I was expecting a hard shift into summer, but usually it happens earlier in May. Tomorrow is the 25th, which would be Memorial Day. Also happens to be my wife's 30th birthday. And we will be celebrating quarantine style. The goal being to find something special for dinner, and just try to keep out of everybody's hair. So lately I've been noticing that I've become, I guess, a little bit of a hippie, a tree hugger. I feel more in tune with nature than I have in the past. And I can't recall if I mentioned this in a video either, but we've seen a lot more animal activity near my house and in our backyard, in our front yard, than we've ever noticed since we've moved in here, which is a little over 2 years ago now. As a matter of fact, the other day we had a cardinal that was hopping on the ground, who was being chased by a rabbit, who was being chased by a squirrel, and they were all playing together. And I found it odd that the cardinal wasn't flying. He was hopping, and then the bunny would hop up a couple steps behind him and let him get ahead, and then the squirrel would follow behind. And to be honest with you, I don't know if that's what it's like out in nature, because since the Industrial Revolution, we've kind of made everything about humans and not about animals or nature or things like that. It doesn't matter about, we have greenways and some green spaces, but we've condensed them all into small places. You go to a park when you want to see greenery, not in your own backyard. Of course, there's more and more construction these days, which I'm sure is scaring animals further and further off into the woods, or what's left of the woods. And it was just interesting to see how animals are actually interacting with each other, and I'm sure that this goes back to how it normally would be. Occasionally I would see a squirrel, And now I typically see them in groups of somewhere to 3 to 5, kind of playing on there's bird feeders in between my house and the house next to us. I see them in the backyard chasing each other across the fence. I see them in the front yard now chasing each other in the trees, and it's stuck with me seeing the cardinal, the rabbit, and the squirrel playing together. The reason I mention all these things is because I have been feeling kind of more and more in tune with nature and with animals, and I know that the circle of life exists, and I know that things, one animal eats another type of animal, and the hawk goes after the smaller bird's eggs, and the snake goes after the bird's eggs, and when the geese or the ducks cross the road, they're at risk because not everybody will stop for them. But I, for one, am a person that believes that if you are in a position to help somebody, that it is kind of your duty, especially if it's someone that is smaller than you, not as strong as you. You're kind of obligated to lend a hand. And from a universal standpoint, if you want to break it down to how I believe, it's karma. You're being tasked with, you have the ability to do something. You can step out and help, or you can choose not to. And I do think, though the circle of life is here for a reason, it is not always the end-all be-all. And although that sounds unusual, what I mean when I say the circle of life is not the end-all be-all is that I do believe that things do happen in nature that are accidental. Now, the perfect example would be the story I'll tell you here shortly, but not everything is caused by the circle of life. Sometimes it's just you get drawn. An animal might, or you yourself may get dealt a bad hand, and you've got to make the best of that situation. Now, I feel as though, excuse me, having a somewhat, I don't want to say it's an unhealthy relationship with the death process and grieving, but more of a feeling inside that says it'd be morally right to help an animal in need when the opportunity arises, rather than letting the circle of life do its thing. And I think you can tell the difference between the quote-unquote circle of life and the occasional bad hand that you or another person or an animal has been dealt. Is it the circle of life when a dog or a cat gets abandoned and they're injured? Is that the circle of life? No. That was circumstantial. Yesterday, my wife and I were on our daily walk. And like a lot of people these days, we have been utilizing our time at home as best we can, but we find occasionally we need to walk. And on the course of our walk, we passed by the neighborhood pool, or one of the neighborhood pools, the one that's closest to our house. And while we were there, I noticed that there was some baby ducks and the mama duck floating around the pool, so I pointed them out. My wife loves baby ducks. They're fuzzy, they're cute, you can't help the same thing with baby geese. It's so funny to see them be fuzzy looking, because we know they're going to turn into these feathered, majestic creatures. So we watch them for a moment, and like most pools, or at least neighborhood use pools, these larger pools, there's the shallow section back over here. It's basically shaped like I don't really know, almost like a Z with no slant, and up and down. So you've got an area here, here, here. The farthest section from us was the shallow section. The steps that go down into the, I think it's like a 2-foot section. Then you start getting into the deeper area, and then back in the corner where we were was the deep end of the pool, where I think it goes down to 8 or 9 feet or something. And of course, there's the swimming lane, so the one with the plastic buoys, lane divider separating that section from one lane, and then just a nylon rope with a couple of smaller buoys separating the deep end from that lane. And I noticed that one of the little duckies was caught on that nylon rope, and try as he might, he could not get over it. And we watched for a few minutes, and I was trying to make a decision on what we were supposed to do. The HOA office is closed, and they are telecommuting, and they tell you very clearly on their message, on their answering machine, that basically if you have a problem, send them an email and they'll get back to you when they get back to you, which doesn't really suit that situation. And then we have a special patrol detail that works in our neighborhood as part of the contract that the HOA holds with local authority. So I called that number, and the gentleman told me, yeah, he doesn't have keys. The only thing that he could recommend would be call the athletic center and get the HOA on the phone. And that's, of course, I've already heard the message that says, send us an email and we'll deal with it. After seeing that little guy struggling and seeing him look exhausted, I kind of figured it would be too little too late if I just called and left a message and then found the email address, because of course they didn't provide it in their message. So I did the only thing that I thought I could do, which was a little bit of trespassing, and jumped over the fence into the pool and set on getting this little guy out of the water. And I find it kind of unusual, and this is why I think sometimes people are placed in situations because they are meant to help. While Mama and the other duckies were doing everything they could to stay away from me, this little guy actually made it off the nylon rope and got stuck trying to get over the bigger lane divider with the ridged buoys. And then when he saw I started paddling the water towards me, hoping that I could convince him to come before I actually had to peel my shoes off and dive in the water after him. And after maybe 15 seconds of trying, he took a look at me and then swam towards me. So I was able to stick my hand underneath him and scoop him out of the water. And as I brought him up to be face to face with me so I could check him out, he breathed what sounded kind of like a sigh of relief. It was this deep, because he had obviously been swimming for a very long time and had been wasting all his poor energy trying to get over these 2 sets of buoys to get back to where his mother and brothers were, sisters and brothers. And he curled up in my hand and was just kind of breathing heavily, almost panting, hoarse panting for such a little guy. And I was a little concerned, but he looked okay otherwise. So I did the only thing I could do, and I put him down on the concrete in the shade, but next to a floaty device that I had found in the pool and laid as kind of a ramp, so that way the other ducks could kind of use it to get out. And I was made aware that wildlife rescue would tell us to just kind of let them do their thing, and within a week the ducks will have learned from Mama enough to be able to get out. But I felt like this little guy just wasn't he wasn't going to make it if I didn't help him. you can tell, and I think you guys have probably experienced things like that. If you have had animals before, you can kind of tell when they're in distress and they need a little help. And I think that's what he needed, was a little break. Now this was, we put him up, and I laid down the second mat on the far corner where Mama kept going into the shallow end for the other little duckies to get out, figuring that eventually they would learn how to get out. The nest must not be far from there. And they made an ideal use of the pool because it's not open right now anyway. And that's not to say that I went home feeling 100% comfortable. We stayed for a few more minutes and we checked on him to make sure he was moving around. And before we left, he had started chirping loudly, I guess to let Mama know that he was still around, because she seemed to have been swimming back around to check on him, but wasn't heading over to get him out of this little sticky bind that he was stuck in. So she kept looking from the other end of the corner over to where he was, and I guess the plan was when he was feeling strong enough, he could jump back in or walk around, which for him probably would have been a healthy walk. And we went home, and that was probably about 6 o'clock that we headed out. And then at 9:30 last night, I started to feel antsy. I needed to know if he was okay. And this is something that, again, as I said a little while ago, I think I have a little bit of an inefficient grieving process and a misunderstanding. I don't like when there's something that I feel like I can shift the odds in. Like this little guy, was it the circle of life for him to have gotten stuck on a man-made object? I don't think so. In all honesty, when you look at the way that the Earth has started to kind of heal, and the way that nature has responded to this situation with how we've been staying home and how carbon emissions have come down, I think it's an accurate thing to say that in the scope of the world, we are not the top of the food chain. We might think we are, but there is one much larger entity, and that's the Earth itself, that kind of gets to decide whether or not we stay here. Tornado, hurricane, typhoon, cyclone, wildfire. Think of all the things: mudslide, avalanche, earthquake, sinkhole. Think of all these things that we have kind of stacked against us and that could happen at any moment. And it tells me that we've been kind of putting ourselves all the way up at the top of the food chain, and the reality is the circle of life goes on around us. And despite whatever we do, we're doing things to nature that it should be striking back against us for. I'm not necessarily saying that this virus thing is a good thing, but when we set up a house in the middle of Tornado Alley, we build a house, we can't be upset when the tornado comes and gets us. This is nature. This is how the world works. This is what it does. Ultimately, I was feeling unrest last night, so I opted to, my wife offered to walk over with me back to the pool at like 9:45 last night to see if he was still there, and we brought a little box with us in case he was still too tired to get up, and if he was injured, because his tail was looking a little beat up, and I don't know if it was just that he had gotten stuck or perhaps he was already a little sickly, but I felt an obligation to check on him outside of what I did to get him out of a situation that we as man created. Gave him an artificial body of water with some additional limitations that shouldn't have been there, or maybe would not have normally have been there. Now, obviously, if this is something that happens in a lake in nature that I can't see happening, well, then I really can't control that, can I? And I'm not going to go out and scour every lake. But when you're popped into a situation where you have the potential to help and you can tell that there's a need for some assistance, I feel as though you have an obligation. When you are the strongest person there, which compared to the duck, obviously I was, and I have the ability to change something about the situation, well, I felt like it was the right thing to do to get him at least out of that situation so he wasn't stuck suffering in the water where he could not get to anybody. So at 9:45 at night, we go back over to the pool and take a flashlight, and I check the far corner. First, we look to see if the patrol is out, so that way if I do have to jump over the fence, I'm not getting in trouble. And we look in the corner, and I see Mama Duck standing out of the water, and the babies appear to be in the corner where I set up the other mats. And we walk back around to check over where I left my little buddy, and he's not there anymore. So I scan the entirety of the pool, and I'm looking for ripples or anything, and the pool is dead still, so I know he's not in there. And I look around in the areas where I had left him, where I had found him originally, and he's not there. And suddenly I felt like a wash of relief. Now, I did not want to scare them by jumping over the fence and walking around to see how many ducks were in the pool and if I could spot my little buddy by his tail. But knowing that he wasn't there and that there was no ripple in the water and there was no duck in the water that I could see, I felt like I had done what I was required to do, what was being asked of me to do. It was an interesting situation, at least in my eyes. An interesting situation. It brings little things into perspective. I've been having these little experiences like this, and I could go in detail about animal experiences. I had one in the fall that I won't talk about now, but it's these little poignant moments that make me feel like I'm actually part of the goings on rather than part of the thing that forced animals to get stuck in weird situations like this. And I've been saying it a lot lately in recent videos, but the communion with nature, since things have started going on, since I've been kind of forced to sit back and see how life actually works, it's been a kind of I regret to use the phrase life-changing, but it has certainly been a learning experience for me as a person. As a matter of fact, there was a video that I tried shooting a couple of weeks ago, and I'm reminded of this because right now there are two squirrels edging towards each other across my fence, and one of them's going to stomp right on my camera. Yep, there he goes. He just did it. But a couple of weeks ago, one of the videos I recorded that never made it onto YouTube, I think it may be these same two squirrels came running across the porch and were maybe at most 3 feet away from me. And I found it very interesting that they feel comfortable enough to be this close. So this communion with nature over the last few weeks has been so very enjoyable, and it's something that I am going to be thinking about for a very long time. And it makes me wonder if maybe living out somewhere where I can experience more nature. My wife and I did have a really enjoyable time on our honeymoon when we were out in Asheville, North Carolina, and it is so beautiful to see the mountains at peak color, and it would be so much more interesting to see it when there's an influx of animals like I'm sure there is now. That's an untouched area for the most part in a lot of areas. But to know that there are less and less people on the road and people out and about, it might be interesting to see what nature's like there as well. So if you've stuck with me throughout this video and felt the hippity-dippityness of where I've started to go, I appreciate you. And I guess that's part of the reason I changed the scope of this channel to become The Joy of Piping, is I very much have been identifying with the way that Bob Ross thought about life and animals, and some things are, there's no mistakes. There's only happy accidents, and yesterday was a happy accident. It was something that could have been bad for the duck, but it was a great experience for me to hold this little guy in my hand and help him out, and feel like I did my part to fix some of the ugly things that we've, as humans, have created in the world. Did I actually fix anything? I might never know, but do I feel like I at least tried? Yeah, and I think it's worth it. So thank you for spending your time with me on this pipe meditation, and I hope to see you guys during the week, provided the weather allows for it. And I guess we'll catch you all in the next one.